Aloha, my name is Banjo Kalma, currently serving as the president of the club.
I'm Anna, currently serving as the Psychology Club secretary. So for our very first speaker for today, we have with us Dr. Beckstead.
And we will be talking about psychology and parenting.
So to start, we would like to ask Dr. Beckstead if you could introduce yourself for us, please.
Sure, I'm Dr. Beckstead. I'm Zach Beckstead. I'm an assistant professor here at BYU Hawaii in the psychology program. I've been here for, what is this, my fifth year? This is my fifth year. I was gonna say fourth year. And I'm, got my bachelor's degree in psychology at BYU. I came home from a mission from New York North mission, which is, the upper part of New York City. Yeah, right after 9/11. I came home a month before 9/11. And so I went to UVSC, which is now UVU, for a couple of semesters, then BYU. Then I went to University of West Georgia for a master's degree. I didn't know what I wanted to do, had no idea, really in psychology. I knew I wanted to do something in psychology. That helped me, get to Clark University, which is in Massachusetts, where I got a PhD in social cultural psychology. It was a social evolutionary cultural psychology was the degree. And I've been teaching since then in Oklahoma, Michigan, now here at BYU Hawaii, where I teach developmental psychology, general psychology, qualitative cultural psychology, anything I can get my hands on. I'm interested in, almost anything. There's actually some things I'm not qualified or interested in teaching, and do research in different areas. So in cultural psychology, qualitative psychology. So that's kind of who I am. I'm married, have 3 adorable children who are wonderful and maddening, but mostly wonderful. So.
Thanks for introducing yourself, Dr. Beckstead. So you mentioned that you teach developmental psychology, and that's actually the class that I took from you. And you mentioned that you have 3 kids. So we wanted to ask you about the different parenting styles. And for the first question, just define each one just really quick.
Yeah. Okay, so the parenting styles, this idea in part comes back to Diana Baumrind, who was a really interesting psychologist. She was, apart from her work with parenting, she was a big critic of Stanley Milgram and his study on obedience, right? Really didn't thought it was very unethical. So she was kind of his sparring partner, critiqued, deconstructed that study for quite a few years. But her work in parenting, right? She saw parenting as like most people, as a rather important activity that a culture, a society engages in. And she saw that parenting kind of can differ along 2 different dimensions, right? Warmth and openness, as well as kind of demandingness. So if you kind of put those together, you can create different typologies, right? From parents who are really warm and demanding, right? They have expectations for their children. They are also invite kind of this dialogue with their children, but there is still this asymmetry, right? That they have the power, the parent's the parent, the child's the child, right? So there's a clear distinction between the roles, but there's still this love, kind of an atmosphere that's created. And so she would call that the authoritative parenting style. Right? Authoritarian parenting would be more of the, where there's still that demandingness, but there isn't the warmth. Where they're, to put it simply, it's kind of like my way or get out. If you don't like what I have to say, well, I'm the parent. I don't care what you have to say, what your feelings, what your thoughts are. And so there's really this asymmetry, but it's even this distance greater. And parenting from this style exerts more of what we call psychological control, kind of that often manipulation to get what you want. Right? So the focus is on compliance. I just want you to do what I say. And then you have The other parenting style, which would be more of the kind of permissive parenting, where there's love, there's warmth, but there isn't a lot of expectations, a lot of demands placed upon the child, right? It's kind of the cliche, well, I don't want you to think of me as mom or dad, but I'm your friend, right? And so a lot of people recognize this from the movie Mean Girls, Amy Poehler's character, right? Just the hey, let's party. We're all going to party together and have fun. And it's like they're still children. There's this immaturity in a way, or at least a desire to be on the same level. Right? So there isn't that distinction between parent and child, and an asymmetry there. Right. So that was kind of the basis, and is the basis for a lot of discussions today. That's not the only type of parenting style. You see a kind of a proliferation today of tiger parenting. Right. This is the battle hymn of the tiger parent, the Amy Chow, Harvard professor. She wrote a book on this, really just saying that American parenting, Western parenting, is too permissive, too easy. There aren't enough demands, expectations on children. So she's trying to hold up the value of a more rigorous type of parenting. And then so you have those helicopter parenting. We could go on and on of different type of parenting styles. And a lot of research has been done on that and the outcomes. What is going to produce the best type of outcome for your child? So that's kind of where it is in developmental psychology right now, partly.
So since you mentioned about, or you enumerated them, what type of parenting styles do you apply to your children, or even with your students?
Very authoritarian. I want the no. I mean, I think that is a conversation that we have is in developmental psychology. Do these fit? Is there a single style that a parent engages in? And do you parent the same child, or you have 3 children, 4 children, 5 children? Do you engage in the same parenting style with all the children? And when I ask this question in class, students repeatedly say, well, my parents, I'm the oldest, for example, and my parents were very rigid. They seem to have more of an authoritarian parenting style than the youngest child, right? My youngest sibling, all of a sudden they could go out and party. They could, there was not a curfew. They took the car, did whatever they wanted. So it's kind of a tricky thing that, I'd like to think for myself, we usually idealize, there's a value in our society of being more of that authoritative parent, right? You watch movies, right? You can watch any movie, you see an authoritarian parent. How do you react? Like especially in American cinema, TV shows, right? They're usually not the person you applaud, right? They're the person you're like, oh my gosh, they need to lighten up a little bit.
I hype my parents for that.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And so I think we would like to see, my wife and I, and you can even get at that, right? The different parents form a perhaps style together and individually, right? That we certainly value one of being parents and maintaining that there are different roles. I'm the parent. I do have kind of the ultimate say. You're the child, but there is a desire to listen to them, to have warmth, right? That's the main thing in our house. Like, we want them to know that they're loved, that we care for them. And it's tricky though. It's always, my wife and I, we talk about this kind of balance of, with my son who's 14, of, because we're a pretty casual family, right? I know, Andrew, you probably know that we're just, and Anna, maybe, the classroom, it tends to be a little more, I'd like to think, a little bit more casual, inviting, but then you always have to, like, sometimes you're like, okay, you have to maintain that, okay, we're still the parent. And so you can't do whatever you want. There's that pushing and testing of boundaries that I see with our kids sometimes.
Every child is special, and then you kind of have this different kind of formula for each child that you apply. Since you mentioned that not of all of them, not we don't have a perfect formula for each
Yeah.
kid, and we apply like kind of different parenting styles to them.
Yeah, but even the idea of a formula, right? That's kind of an interesting way of putting it, because it implies that there, you have your equation,
Yeah.
right? That you know, okay, well, I do this and then I get this outcome. Right? And so, in some ways that there's this guide there, you do relate to your children differently, depending on them, right? Because I know I've joked about this in class, and I always tease about this, is that I was the best parent before I ever had children.
Oh.
Right? I was the greatest parent ever, right? Because I knew, like, oh, okay, I see a kid crying at the grocery store wanting a candy bar, and the mom giving it. We'll never do that, right? Or at a restaurant, the kid's crying, upset, and the parent hands them a phone to shut them up, and you're just like, oh, watching my brother and his wife at the time, how they parented, or other people, you're just like, okay, that's good, that's not good, Mar, we're gonna do this. And then it comes down to it, you're like, so much depends upon the child and the situation you find yourself in, right? So there's always this struggle. You're trying to create this kind of equilibrium, trying to create the stability in your relationship, in your house, right, as a parent, and there's so much that can disrupt that. There's a lot. And so you parenting, it's not a science, right? It's as much art. And and if you're religious, right, it's trying to invite the spirit, trying to bring help from a supernatural and sources, really, to the endeavor. So yeah, it's messy. So I think that typologies are great, right? Any typology, it's a good and analytical frame. There are limitations to this. You can see and study that, but when you're parenting, when you're in the trenches, you have more of you're not really thinking, okay, what kind of parenting style am I adopting? You're developing your ways of parenting based off of what you've seen as a child, right? That what's been modeled for you. You're also basing it off of your culture, the million subtle, and mostly they're implicit, right? It's not like you get from your culture a rule book. Okay, this is parenting the American way, the Filipino way, right? It's you see it with all those interactions, the scowls when somebody says something, right? Those type of socialization practices of either teasing or spanking, hitting, corporal punishment, right, of what is valued. And I know we talked about this before, Banjo, but parenting really is kind of a moral activity.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just, okay, you're fixing up a car that you want to run. Right? You're not just cultivating a garden that you want to be beautiful and give you food. Right? But what you're doing is the idea is to cultivate, to help a child become who you think they should become, and as a member of a particular group, whether that's as a member of the church, as a member of your family, society. It's always based in reference on some kind of value of what is the right way to be a person. So parenting often is related to that. It's informed by so many different kind of background assumptions, values, philosophies that we're often not really aware of, right? They tend to be more implicit than explicit, right? And so in some ways, learning about that, and I'd say the value of developmental psychology, I would hope, is kind of becoming aware of some of those assumptions and the implicit values of parenting and the cultural kind of notion of parenting.
Yeah. So there are a lot of factors from if I get what you're saying, there are a lot of factors affecting how to properly parent our children. So you mentioned that your expectations versus reality, before you became a parent. but I'm sure that you've learned all about it before, like before you became a parent, like all these parenting styles. Um, but was it able to help you, like the knowledge that you gained about parenting prepared you to be a parent? I mean, even though
Well,
it's different,
yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. So you're like, what value? And that's what my wife often would say when our kids were struggling with our kids. Like, you handle them. You're teaching developmental psychology.
Yeah.
So like, why don't you know how to fix them? Was kind of
Oh
the
my gosh.
idea. And I'm like, it doesn't quite work that way. But yeah, I in some ways, I look at this. I really didn't get into developmental psychology until we had a child to begin with. So. It's been one where you're in it and you see different things and you both see things that can help you out. I think one of the most helpful aspects of developmental psychology to me, because emotions are so central to who we are, right? And emotions and cognition, we often treat them as separate domains when they're really integrated, right? They're part of a whole. And so we talk a lot about emotional regulation. At least that's one of my favorite topics, in part because I see how important it is and how children struggle with their emotions to be able to modulate them to a proper level. Like when you're playing a game with a kid, Candyland, right? With a kid that's 3 or 4, they can't help it. They just getting upset if they don't win. So the one thing that I'm kind of more mindful of, I would say, because of what I've been learning about it in developmental psychology and teaching, is just, well, how can I help my child to kind of deal with those emotions, right? To deal with often difficult emotions like disappointment, anger, frustration, embarrassment, guilt, shame, all those things. Like, how do you help them? And one is just to recognize, like, some of these things are quite normal. Right? The things that you would see as really problematic, emotions. Well, I don't want my child to be angry all the time. One is to see it's kind of natural, right? Where they're at in their life course on their journey. I'm not surprised that they're getting mad right now. And here's how I might be able to help them in this particular situation. Right? Kind of like the marshmallow study when kids are, Walter Mischel, the main objective of his study was to figure out how can we get children and teach even adults to modify those emotions, to engage in more self-regulation, self-control, right? Because he was a smoker. And wanted to quit smoking. So how do you do those things? And for him, it's, well, have children imagine kind of this cognitive reorientation of the situation. So I think that, and I mean, even something like lying, when your kids start lying, it's devastating as a parent. You're like, they've just, there's this period of it, you're living in the Garden of Eden with your children, right? And they're innocent, they're sweet, it's wonderful. And all of a sudden, they lie to you and you're like, curse you, you get out right now. You are a fallen angel. You are no longer pure and innocent. And in some ways, I think it is kind of an interesting kind of parallel, but you really see this becomes in a way, a fascinating milestone.
Yeah.
Right. Because lying, if you think about it, it requires so much kind of cognitive sophistication to be able to recognize that something that I might be able to trick you, right? You believe X and I'm going to help you believe X, or I don't want you to know what I did. So it's to me, again, you don't panic when it happens, right? But you certainly try and help your children, because we're engaging in moral activity, I would see it as, where you help them away from that, like, and encourage them not to lie, but also see it for what it is, a kind of a normal part of development. And then our job as parents is to help them. Yeah, right. Yeah. To offer some correction, right? To offer some guidance for that.
That must be very disappointing to know your children is lying to you. And
Oh yeah, no, it is. You're like,
I feel like I
how
did that on my childhood.
I know, but then you recognize that you're like, okay, exactly. And I mean, it is because they're trying to avoid guilt and shame and those things. So they're like, I don't want to feel bad. I don't want you to make me feel bad, or I want that thing. I have this goal, and you're going to be in the way of my goal if I tell you really the truth, right? Or I'm going to get punished, whatever it is. I mean, it's a very, it's a very egocentric thing, not
that's
in a
normal.
necessarily, yeah, right. But that's normal. Yeah, right. And now if the child is habitually lying and they continue to lie growing up, we're really looking at something abnormal and not healthy. But the very act, I think it causes a panic for a lot of parents and disappointment. And that's one thing we can learn is, well, that's to be expected. And so how do we deal with it?
And it's just a part of parenting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And you had this analogy about the Garden of Eden a while ago. How does parenting connect to our idea of a deity or God?
Yeah, no, I think I wish I could remember. I should have looked up some of the studies that have been conducted, but there is some research that indicates that our conception of God, of this kind of spiritual realm, is often informed by the relationship we have with our parents, right? Especially with the Father, if we're talking about God the Father, right? That how we see God is in part influenced by kind of the parents that we have and the way that our Father related to us, whether they were warm, kind, or rigid, authoritarian. We mind that helps to shape our conceptions, and it models for us what God might be like. Right? So if we have a father, who's really just demanding, controlling, right? That might, in a way, suggest to us, well, that's kind of, they're both authority figures, right? God's an authority,
and we compare them.
Yeah, and so that it sets up an expectation. Okay, so just coming back to that, right? The idea that we develop, this internal working model, a kind of a scheme of what the said person is supposed to be like. So, in Christianity, right, if believing in God, right, that's often the image that we construct of God is going to be influenced by our relationship, right? Not completely determined by any sense. So, and to me, that I think that's pretty important to recognize as a parent, that you can influence in many different ways, but just in part through your example, through your modeling of what your children are, how they're going to conceptualize, God the Father or heavenly parents. So I think it's really important to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
Especially when first time you caught them lying.
yeah, right. I mean, because exactly. You see that. I mean, that's where you do see some kind of parallels, right? What happened with Adam and Eve, right? After they ate of the fruit, they recognized we're naked. They're hiding themselves, right? They're not lying, but they're certainly hiding themselves, right? Kind of experiencing the sense of shame, and how do you deal with that? Now, of course, something happened, right? They couldn't stay in the garden, but God didn't abandon them, right? They were not left alone, right? They were given help. God sent help repeatedly because he loved them. So I don't know. I think there's certainly some great parenting lessons.
That's true. Yeah, I definitely agree. Now that you related parenting with the gospel, it got me thinking that it's also a way to prepare us to be like gods and goddesses in the future, because even us adults, we do.
Right.
Since we're all children of God, then he probably feels like we are learning what he probably feels with us when we make mistakes. So
right, yeah. And I think I like that you bring that up, because you think about parenting, and it's not the only way, right? I think there are other ways of getting these experiences. So I don't want to say parenting's the end all be all. But one other thing, if you think about it in terms of God and our relationship to him, and kind of the development of part of the purpose of our life is is to develop to become more godlike. You know, part of that is parenting. It's we talked about egocentrism as a child, but even as an adult, I'm pretty egocentric, right? That idea of I have my wants, my desires, my projects, things that I want to do, you know. And I used to joke in developmental psychology, you know, that children ruin your life, right? And I used to say that more when our kids weren't sleeping, and so now I probably say that less, right? But it's not just they ruin your life and they make things difficult, but they disrupt it. They disrupt, okay, you know what? I want to watch this movie. Well, your kids, they don't want to watch that movie. They don't want to necessarily go along with your interests. Well, I want to go to a museum this weekend. A museum? Oh, no way. We want to go to Chuck E. Cheese or something else, right? And so they're constantly tugging on your time, on your energy. And, you know, so you're really having to transcend your own egoistic desires. I want to sleep, right? But I have a baby that's crying right now. Right? So what do? Do I put my pillow over my head and try to ignore, let my spouse take care of that, pretend I didn't hear, and you know, or do I respond to that call? So children are constantly calling on us to care for them. Right? They demand and require care. And I think that's really important. But I think that is, to me, kind of the heart of God is that love, that care, the generosity, that, you know, I love you and I want you to be your best self and to have close relationships. And that means that there's that work in that. There's a lot of work in being a parent, and being, I think, a God is, you know, being God is constantly getting outside of yourself. This kind of transcendence, the self-transcendence. And that's one thing that parenting, and like I said, it's not the only way, right? There are other ways of kind of getting outside of our own egoistic frameworks, at least for a moment, right? We kind of go back to that, but it's a way of interrupting our usual natural way of being, you know, that kind of natural man of caring for our own concerns, food, survival, things that matter to us.
That's true. It's making us more charitable. Like, it's a way.
Yeah.
Being more Christ-like.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Beckstead. It also, now that you also related, especially like God with being a father, it reminded me of my class in abnormal psychology, and we were talking about some disorders, especially borderline personality disorder. And my professor mentioned that most of the time, children who grew up without a father, or like if their father left or if their father died, they're more likely or more susceptible to these disorders, but not all of them, but just more likely. And he mentioned that it's usually never the mother, like if the mother's not present, compared to if the father's not present, the one with the father who's not present is more likely. So do you think it's related to, it's just your opinion, why do you think that is?
Why the father, it seems like there are more negative outcomes if the father is not present, or there are problems with the father. Boy, that's a great question.
Even in church,
I don't know. I am partly, maybe as a cultural psychologist, you know, we do have a patriarchal, you know, society where again the father has historically and traditionally been conceptualized as the authority figure, right? When you get home, you'll talk to your dad, right? We usually put the role, the responsibility on the father. So I guess, you know, just speculating. This is certainly, I'm like venturing far from my area of knowledge, but I think that there's something there. So it would be interesting to look at other societies and matriarchal societies, right, where there's different kind of social organization, This does also remind me of Freud, right? Freud certainly saw this, that he talked about the famous Oedipus complex, in which he explained that in class, and everyone's like, really? How did you get there, Freud? That's just weird, right? But it's still that idea. And he saw, homosexuality as resulting from this poor resolution of the Oedipus complex, right? Which now most people would find like, no, Freud, you were off. But the basic idea that the relationship between a son, a male, and their father, that there are implications for what happens later in life. I think we can trace that back to Freud, this idea in psychology, at least, which, again, I think part of it has to do with the way that the kind of gender roles and norms. So whether this is something that will continue on, as society shifts, changes, will be interesting. I think kind of fascinating. It's an empirical question. What are we going to see? Will we still see the same patterns today, which, into the future? I'm kind of curious. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for sharing your insights. Yeah, I never thought of it that way, because I took that class a year ago, but until now I've been wondering like, why is that? But
that's cool to make that connection. Yeah, right, to see how development, right? That is a question of development, and I like the idea of abnormal psychology to connecting it, right, and how it's something that emerges, and how does it emerge? What's leading to the emergence of borderline or some other pathological problems.
Yeah, wonderful. Dr. Beckstead, since you taught us about this parenting styles, and we kind of have this background, what advice could you give to the kind of newlywed and expecting to have a child, or like future parents just like us?
Enjoy your expertise right now. You're the best parent that you'll ever be. No, I don't know. I think that's a great question. I think in some ways you're going to probably read books, and you're going to go based off, parent based off of the expectations that you've had, your parents have set, kind of what we talked about. But, I think one thing to recognize, at least advice that I think, is things that happen that go well, right, you want to take a lot of credit for, right? And things that where your children are struggling, you might want to take that blame, right? And I think to recognize that we have a huge influence. I don't want to downplay that at all, right? That I think parents, it's really important. But children have their own personality, their own temperament, their own kind of, their own sense of their emotions, their sense of right and wrong kind of conscience. We can help with this, but ultimately, you're limited in control, right? And that's something that's hard to recognize, right? To give up that as a parent, I'm not always in control. When they're really young, right, you have more control, right? You can put them to bed. You can, there's more guidance that you can give. But even at that, right, they're going to cry. They're going to frustrate you, right? They're going to, it's constantly in a way, I hate to use like war metaphors, like a battle, but it's a very uncertain thing. It leads to a lot of doubts. Am I doing this right? Right? You compare yourself to other parents, to other families, and you can see, why don't the people across the street, their kids seem to be wonderful, right? And our kids are constantly fighting, and if I were only a better parent, so I think part of it is being a parent is just do the best you can. And it might be cliche, but I think if you really love your children, and let them grow, that's just enjoy that. Enjoy their development, right? And we had that advice given to us when our kids were young, and we hated this, is just enjoy your children while they're young, Like, parents with teenagers would see us out with our 3 little kids, and, they're crying and fighting, and it's just miserable, and they just enjoy them while they're young. And looking back, I'm like, okay, there's some wisdom to that advice, but it's okay to not love every minute of it. It's okay to struggle and to recognize that sometimes you're going to get it wrong, right? But you can learn from that. I think, we should look at those failures of parenting. There's been plenty of times where, I'm like, you know what, that was a really bad move. I shouldn't have done that. And so one of the things that I think I've done well, like so many things I haven't done well as a parent, but one of the things I've done well is I've been able to go to them and just say, what, I'm sorry that I shouldn't have gotten mad at you. That was wrong of me, and I think, especially with my oldest son, I just see that now. He'll apologize now. He's the one who comes and seeks out, like, Dad, that was wrong of me. Instead of being defensive. I think sometimes as a parent, you want to be defensive and you want to have that authority. So it's kind of a balance. So I guess that would be my advice. Just recognize that you're going to make mistakes as a parent, and that's okay. But if you can learn from them, apologize. It's never a bad thing to say, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Right. And it's going to be an uncertain thing. It's one of those things that it's going to test you. It's a huge test in almost every day. And that's okay.
Wonderful advice. I'm gonna take that because because as a parent we are always maintaining this figure, but recognizing that sometimes we are wrong could really help them kind of possess that attitude later on in their life. Amazing.
Well, just a bonus question.
I like bonus questions. All right. Do I get extra credit?
Yes.
Okay, good.
So if you were to suggest books or movies that you yourself have watched or read that help you with parenting, what would they be?
I was talking to Banjo the other day about this. Just the idea of parenting books, magazines, don't read them. So maybe,
really?
Maybe I shouldn't say that, but that's kind of my advice. Is that I'm trying to think, because you're going to find like how to get your baby to sleep, right? We read so many books on that, and you're like, that doesn't apply to my baby. And so many books, so many are that are written from an expert perspective, speaking at a very general level. Mm-hmm. Right? And so the frustration that I've had, honestly, with books and my wife is that we look at it and think, well, okay, I'm sure that fits for some child, but not my child. So I can't say honestly. We've gotten some. Our youngest child is very headstrong. Just very, very stubborn. And we've gotten a couple of books on that, like how to deal with a strong-willed child and stuff like that. And honestly, they haven't been that helpful. And so I think part of it is, movies. I don't know if honestly we've ever watched a movie, searching out for kind of parenting advice, but you do see movies, you do see these examples, these models of, okay, this is really wonderful parenting. So I think when you find those are beautiful, wonderful. I'm sorry, I don't have any like resources. Like this is a resource for parenting. I think so much of it it is through trial and error. And also we were talking about this, Banjo, a while ago, just the idea that as you parent, you go back and revisit your childhood and even how your parents parented. And you're like, okay, these are the things that I really liked, and these are the things that maybe I don't want to keep, right? So, to kind of reevaluate. But even at that, you're going to, if you have a child, you most likely, and hopefully you'll be in a relationship, marital relationship, and you're going to have to balance that out, right? As a parent, it's its own kind of thing, that even though you have ideas or Banjo as a parent, whoever you marry is going to have ideas of what it means to be a parent, right? So So I think that's in itself always a struggle. And then you're gonna be drawing on different stocks of knowledge and backgrounds, that are based on snippets, conversations, books, movies, things like that. But working that out is going to be something that you have to do together, and that's hard for a lot of people, for a lot of marriages. Raising children is certainly a stressor. For that. So yeah. Sorry, Anna. I don't get extra credit. No extra credit for me.
No, you answered it perfectly. Yeah, it actually turned into an advice for future parents as well. So
I hate to give too much advice, because I'm certainly not. If you're at our house, you're like, wait, what? No, you're giving advice.
Awesome. So this is a question that we'll be asking all of our guests in our podcast.
Yes.
What does psychology mean to your life?
Psychology, what does it mean to my life? Oh man, that's a lot. There are a lot of things. On the one hand, it means a vocation, right? It's a career, but a vocation, a calling, in a way to be a psychologist. Right? It's what I've dedicated my life to doing, to teaching that. And it's, as a member of a society, especially in the West, psychology, I've always said it's everywhere, right? Psychology, it's a kind of a meaning system that we often draw on to make sense of our lives, for good and sometimes for bad, right? And it's something it's kind of like now the ocean we swim in. If you're a fish, you don't recognize that you're swimming in the ocean. We don't often recognize the air that we're breathing. That it's there. We just kind of take it for granted. But it's there, and it really is influential. And so to me, being aware of that, right, making those assumptions that we have a psychology explicit, right, because I do think it has a role in society. Whenever we talk about influencing somebody, reinforcement, why somebody's so uptight, anal, we're going to counseling, right? Oh, you should see a therapist, right? We're invoking some kind of, often again, kind of implicit ideas of psychology in our life. So it's always there, but it's something that's fascinating. If you think of psychology as just the study of human beings, of how we are the way that we are, what does it mean to be human? I think is endlessly fascinating. So on the one hand, it's complex. Psychology is both an institution that has a lot of influence in our society. Personally, it's a vocation to me, but also just understanding each other is a source of endless interest and discovery, right? That never ends.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Professor Beckstead. Any last word?
No, thank you. This is so much fun. I am grateful you're doing this, and you guys are wonderful interviewers. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Beckstead, for dropping by and
participating in our very first podcast.
Yeah, like I said, it can only go up from here now.
I don't think so.
And to those who don't know, Dr. Beckstead is our club advisor. So
yes.
Yeah.
And also internship coordinator. Where can we find you, Dr. Beckstead?
Well, I mean, I'm in my office right now. But you can email me, call me. I think you can find that contact information. Once we're back in person, drop by. I'm in, I don't even know what our building name is. We're by the academic advising. I'm in, I think, Office 107. You just holler down the hall, and I'm right here. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to meeting everyone, getting together in the club when we're in person again. I really cannot wait for that. This is awesome to be able to do it via Zoom, but it'll be a day of rejoicing when we're in the same room together.
Awesome. Yes, thank you once again, Dr. Beckstead. We really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. We really learned a lot. So for those who are watching, don't forget you can reach out to him anytime. And yeah.
Thank you so much for watching and tuning in our podcast. And we are hoping that next week you will be joining us again with our new speaker for for our new episode of our podcast. Again, take care, everyone. Mahalo.